Welcome to Women's Wisdom, a series on sensuality, sexuality, love, power, and other issues that support the honoring and empowerment of women's experience in the world now and into the future. The inspiration for this series and the topics themselves were raised by you, the women we've met while touring the country, leading women's circles and conversations. There were so many overlaps in the concerns and narratives women shared that we wanted to bring dialogue out into the open. Rosebud Woman is a family-owned company that is all about reverent, intimate wellness for all stages of a woman's life. We are dedicated to bringing more joy and reducing suffering in minds, hearts, bodies, and culture around the female experience. Consider this series as our gift to you. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Women's Wisdom, brought to you by Rosebud Woman. We're so glad that you're here today. I'm Lisa Betzlacqua, and I'm your host on today's show and for all 9 episodes of Women's Wisdom. Before I introduce our guest today, I'd like to remind you that we are here for you. And if you have questions, we would love to hear them. If you have thoughts, we would love to hear them. Anything is fine, and it is all open. Today, we will be talking about elderhood through art, words, and the body. We'll be talking about empowerment through the ages and stages of life. So if you have thoughts on that, or if you have questions for our guest, please drop them into the Q&A box below, and we will do our best to get to them, and we really do want to hear from you. Our guest today, Joan Marie, expresses her inner world, her inner journey through her multi-sensory and multimedia art. She is the advocate for many organizations which support compassionate cities, and she supports the journey to becoming a more compassionate person through those organizations. She is a steward of the Red Tent in Sacramento area, and we'll be hearing a little more about that. And she is a proponent for and a practitioner of conscious touch. She's an educator of that modality and a massage practitioner since 1990. She is also a mother and a grandmother. So welcome to the show, and we're going to bring on Joan Marie. There we go. Hello, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here with us today.
There we go.
There we go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. I'm wondering if, to start us off, if you would be willing to share a little bit about art and how you identify as an artist. I think that when we were speaking before, you mentioned that everyone's an artist in their own way, and that might not always have been the case for you or something that you personally claim. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your own personal journey that led you to your current identity as an artist.
Absolutely. Well, growing up, I would, color, paint by number, things like that. But I had a tendency to paint and imagine things in my head. And I was always kind of scared to put that outside of me. There's a place of perfection when it stays in the realm of imagination. And so I started the journey in my early 30s of actually starting to paint, and my hands, I'd actually shake or I'd get very emotional. But what I found was that it became a really important vehicle for me to create something beautiful out of any kind of emotional pain that I was dealing with. And so that really got me going in creating beauty in the world and just the passion of connecting with nature. So it was also a way for me to learn what it means to commune with my inner world and to develop a language with my inner world. And that's been a very important tool in my life.
Was there a time in your life when that wasn't the case, in a way that was painful or disconnecting? Like, it sounds like it was a journey for you, and I'm wondering.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, a lot of us did not know that we were empathic when we were young. And so being a body worker, I became a body worker in 1990. And so you start, it opens up a lot of doors to you that weren't open before. And so I started studying the energy system and things like that, and the emotional body. And I also worked with marriage, family, and child counselors for 25 years. And so I worked with a lot of people in trauma. And so what I learned was that as a child, we don't really understand what is happening with the emotional information that's coming in, and we think it's all ours. And so you start learning to ask the question, is this mine? And then that helps start weeding it out. But up to that point, a lot of times I felt like I was crazy, that I was always over emotional, that I didn't realize I was taking on the emotional content of most of what was in the room. So.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up something really important. And interestingly, our guest last week, Dr. Kat Meyer, also talked about the power of self-connection. And in her case, she discovered it through yoga. And she talks about how she became connected with herself and with sensuality through yoga. So I think this is a nice segue in terms of connecting the experience and the profundity of the body as a guide.
Absolutely.
And she's much younger than you and I. And so it's really a great connection to and reminder of the fact that this is relevant at all stages of our lives. Our bodies are our guides.
Absolutely. And that there is a very personal language between our body and ourselves. And that's part of the importance of communing with it. I started doing yoga when I was pregnant, and my son is now 38. So I've surpassed the halfway of, doing yoga half of my life. So what I found about yoga is that it helps you discover the center of your being. And one of the most important journeys you can explore is we'll never have peace in the outside world unless we explore where we're at war inside ourselves.
Right.
And yoga gives you pathways of doing that. And yoga teaches you the power of surrender. Culturally, we're taught, that surrender is a sign of weakness and, things like that. But it's actually in yoga, it's very much a place of power, because we start discovering where we're holding, and we may be holding things that no longer serve us, or that it's holding information that we're ready to receive.
Right. Amazing. So you've talked now about the body as one of the guides through which we discover our own empowerment. And we were going to contextualize this not only around the body and about sensuality, but also around art and words. And so we're going to weave our way through those different ideas as we talk about what it means to be empowered through the ages and in elderhood, as we're calling it. So I want to circle back to the idea of words. You just mentioned you made a comment about the body and words. And I think there's something that has come up a lot in my realms recently around the fact that as women, and in terms of our sexuality and our sensuality, we have for many decades not really had words that we could claim that were empowering for us around our sexuality. And so in our first episode, Lucia Pavoni, she showed us a model of the female genitalia. And something that's amazing, and you and I talked about it at some point, we don't have words for this. And in fact, Rosebud Woman, through the process of advertising, has also come up against this. There are no words that are acceptable and accurate for the female genitalia. And so I've been thinking a lot about words like pussy, and you mentioned cunt as a word that, what do we do with this, and what word can we be comfortable with? Those are words that activate people in many ways because we don't have powering and claim words. So you want to talk about that?
Absolutely. One of the ways why I'm so passionate about expressing ourselves through art is that there's a huge spectrum of what art means. And so it's really just about using your body as a vehicle to express your soul and your inner world. And so it could be dance, music, song, spoken word, art, you know. So one of the things I like doing with myself is kind of throwing myself off the cliff and doing things that I'm not used to doing. And so I've been in the vagina monologues twice. And one of them, the first time I was the moaner. And then the second time I reclaimed cunt. And so this year we're doing Raise the Vibration, and each of us are getting to do personal spoken word that we've written or song, and expressing ourselves. So what I think is really important with that is exploring the power of words. And exactly like you said, the language of the feminine has been literally kind of taken away from us. And it's up to us to reclaim it. Nobody's going to do that for us. So when I had to do the monologue of Reclaim Cunt, I started doing a little research about the word, because in this time, that's kind of like one of the worst things you could say to somebody is to call them a cunt.
That kind of word is going to activate a lot of women. Even I know the word pussy activates a lot of women, and the word cunt is definitely going to activate us because we have so many associations that are not empowering.
And they're more than likely negative, right? And so what I found was that in many cultures, the word cunt or the sound of kun or kanta was a goddess in all different cultures. And that was a real empowering thing to know and to reclaim. So words have always kind of fascinated me. I'm a logophile, so I'm a lover of words, and I love word origins. And so one of the things that I noticed when I first saw the vagina monologues was in the 90s, and you could not put the word vagina in the paper. So it was, the V monologues, or, they had different ways of showing it. But I think it's probably even an issue now, which is crazy because every human being comes from a vagina. So it's like, what's the problem here?
Yeah, I definitely think it's definitely something that has, like I say, come up in terms of advertising. They block advertising that uses the word pussy-ceutical, say, for example, for Rosebud's products. So that's been pretty interesting. So because I think not everyone knows what vagina monologues is, can you just do a real brief description of it so people understand? Because I think it's a powerful cultural
It really is. And this is the month for it. Eve Ensler is a brilliant writer. And what she did was, back in the 70s and 80s, she got really fascinated about creating a platform for women to talk about their vaginas. And so all over the world, in the month of February, people are doing the vagina monologues, and it raises money locally for organizations that support stopping violence towards women and children. So I really invite people, no matter where you are, Google it and find out where it's happening. And when you find it in your area, think about trying out for it next year and being in it, because that's what I ended up doing. Is I always supported it and went and watched it. And then I thought, that would be a jumping off the cliff. And then it was totally jumping off the cliff to become the moaner, because you have to, express the sounds of orgasm on stage. So that was an experience to own. But the most powerful thing from that was owning my moan. Because what I found was our truest voice isn't only from our throat, it's from our wombs. And when you connect with nature and you connect through the womb, that's your voice of power.
Beautiful. Beautifully said too. I'm like, boom. I was hoping your computer was going to do that sound again that it's doing yeah, because then I was going to say, every time your computer goes beep, we're going to say that's a boom. Yes. So another multimedia art project that you've been involved with is the Red Tent.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you can also share a little bit about that, because I believe that has some similarities, doesn't it, in terms of it's a project that's more extensive than just your one project. Can you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. There's a red tent movement that is global. And again, look and see if it's in your area. And if it's not, consider starting it in your area. The red tent is open to your own creative process. But the legend of the red tent, there has been a book written about it, and there was a movie made. But it basically, when tribes were more nomadic, there was a tent that allowed a quiet and separate space for women that were menstruating. And so it ended up becoming a place where women communed, and it was a safe place for the spectrum of women with birth and death, and it held everything in between. So you could share what was happening to you and laugh, cry, all emotions are accepted. And so what we do in the red tent here in Carmichael is I actually have a physical red tent, but a 10 by 10 doesn't hold a lot of people. So if I'm at an event, we do short, small gatherings where 8 to 10 people can come in and have the experience of communing. But what I do when we have a larger event is at my office in Carmichael, we actually set up the red tent outside the door. So women have an opportunity to actually enter another state of consciousness by coming into the red tent. I wash their feet and welcome them. I'm very connected with the Magdalene energy. And so I want to create a space through art and through creating a place of beauty and sacred space that they shift their consciousness and come into an awareness of how every part of them is sacred.
Beautiful. So you mentioned Mary Magdalene, and I know that was something that you mentioned also in our conversation about the role that Mary Magdalene has played in your life. The Magdalene's Mirth isn't one of your art pieces called Magdalene's Mirth?
My business that has my art is Magdalene's Mirth.
Right.
And a long time ago, I was given the word mirth. It's an older word that isn't used very often, so a lot of people don't know what it is. But it's joy and merriment and celebration. And so I have Mirth to Earth and Magdalene's Mirth. So Mary Magdalene, I grew up Catholic. And so when I got divorced, I was 35 and I was spiritual, but not religious. And so it was such a devastating time for me. I consider divorce a living death, because things still go on, but it's a very deep ending. And you have to review the dreams that you had as a couple and decide which ones you can still embrace and work with. And so that was very much a process for me. And so connecting with Mary Magdalene, in the Catholic religion, there's not very many feminine sheroes that stand out. And so for me, the Magdalene, I always had, even as a little girl, a sense of the sacred about her. And so the more I explored back in that time, that was almost 30 years ago, you would have to read a whole book to find 1 or 2 sentences about her. And now if you go to a bookstore, there's whole sections about Mary Magdalene. So it's a really great example of how thoughts become consciousness, and then consciousness becomes reality. So I see the Magdalene as very much a full archetype of being a woman who is whole unto herself, and that every aspect of her is sacred.
I see. So you are using Magdalene's energy in a way that's reclaiming it. It sounds like to me, now I didn't grow up religious, but as I understand it, Mary Magdalene as a an archetype within religion has a different kind of energy around her. And it sounds like you're taking that piece and adding to it and making it richer.
Absolutely. In Catholicism, Mary Magdalene is called a whore and a prostitute, and yet she was the first to see Jesus when he rose. So that would not be a role that would be with someone that was not of a higher stature. And in legend, he actually told her to go and tell the apostles to prepare themselves for him to see, come and visit them. And so that really got my mind going of who she is. And what my meditations and guidance has showed me is that I really believe she was from the temples of Isis, that was a time when the patriarchy was starting to take over the matriarchy. And so the temples were being torn down and the male dominance was taking form. So it would make sense that she would become more of a slanderous term of being a prostitute, which I believe in the temples, they incorporated Tantra, which sexuality, sacred sexuality, is a way to connect with God. And, you know, how many times have you called out to God in a state of ecstasy, right? You know, so it's a sacred place of being that we don't always give ourselves permission for. So it really made me start exploring how society has suppressed women through language. So whore is also, the word origin is hora, and hora is from the temples. It's a woman that is sacred. So, you know, that right there, when you like get that and own that, and kanta, owning that we are sacred, every part of us. There isn't one part that's better than the other. And so our sensuality is for every part of our being, not just our sexuality, and that we were meant to be ecstatic beings.
I'm interested in your use of the metaphor and the symbol of the washing of feet. And what comes to mind when I hear about that is that in some ways it's an act of service, it's an act of generosity, and it's an act of welcoming. And it also seems like it may communicate that same piece, is that all parts of ourself, the lowest and the highest, are sacred and needing of connection and generosity, and then also brings in your commitment to touch and to compassion through touch. Is that the general idea? Is there something that's more specific that you can speak to as to why you incorporate that into your space, your red tent space?
Yeah, that it is, I have that concept connected with the Magdalene. Again, there's story in the Bible of washing Jesus's feet, and she washed it with her hair, and she used spikenard. Spikenard's an essential oil that I personally like using as a massage therapist. I incorporate that, and it's great for anointing and blessing. And washing of the feet is symbolic in a lot of ways. The act is very humbling, and it's very much a way of connecting, and also it's a very loving thing to do. It really puts you in your heart to do that to another person. And in receiving it, it's also symbolic of pardoning yourself, that you can wash away the path you've been on, kind of cleaning your feet from where you have been to step into a new realm that may offer you a new path, a new way of being, giving yourself a pardon, a path of forgiveness.
Right. So you're participating in someone else's self-acceptance and self-forgiveness, as well as dropping yourself into generosity and an act of love, really.
Absolutely. And it's an invitation. You know, it's always a personal choice on the journey that you're on. And so it's letting people know that they're stepping into a realm that is in acceptance. There's no judgment. It's a safe place to share what's going on with yourself, and that's really important too. And some women that's a natural part of their lives, and a lot of women that may be really a new experience to trust, and how do you build that? And so I'm a big proponent of sharing the concept. I created an acronym from Kant of communing, undulating, nourishing, and truth-telling. And so I think that all of those are the aspects that occur inside the red tent. Undulating is a very important part of yoga, and the exploration of yoga, when women incorporate that kind of movement with dance, that is different. A lot of yoga that's taught is very masculine. You know, it's warrior, it's the sharp, more edges, and doing it with dance, I think, is more like where belly dancing comes from, and just that Kundalini energy, letting that kind of snake undulation move throughout your body and through your being. So
I really appreciate how in all of the work that you're doing, and we'll talk about your visual art too, but in all the work you're doing in the performance space and in getting clear on our word histories and speaking about that and creating these spaces, that you're identifying the historical shame that has been so much a part of our experience as women, and telling a new story around it and creating new experiences around it. That is so much the intention of the Woman's Wisdom series, and part of the motivation for Rosebud Woman starting it was this was the kind of conversation that was coming up for so many people in so many spaces, how we have shame and this withholding of ourselves, and how there's this desire and need to reclaim this space. And I feel like we're on such a precipice of so much change in that way right now, that there's a real linking of arms that women are experiencing around all the different ways we can do that. And I appreciate how much of a multi-potentialite you are, and how you have very many ways that you approach it. So I wanted to invite you to talk about how that intention to combat shame, to create new stories, and to help women empower themselves and each other is shown in your art.
Oh gosh. Okay. In my art, well, first and foremost, the foundation would be using it as a platform to transform my pain into peace. And that it was a way for me to take it out of my body, and also communing, learning to commune with ourselves and our inner worlds. The more intimate relationship you build with yourself, the deeper you can go with other people. And that actually may scare people, but by doing it with ourselves first, you just start the path of doing your best to love radically. That everything you forgive the way you want to be forgiven. It changes the arena. It changes the landscape of how you do your life. And it's been really healing for me. Before, when I was younger and in my 30s, that was really hard. When you were hurt, I would obsess about, like, why did they do this, and why. We can pay attention when we're saying the word why a lot. That is a place of victim. And not that victim is negative, but because sometimes it is very appropriate. In our youth, we are victims in many ways, because we have to trust older people, the elders around us, to take care of us. And sometimes they do a great job, and sometimes it's not so great, and very painful things can happen in our life. That's part of our story. So by communing with ourselves as we age, we can start building an empowerment within ourselves to meet those parts of ourselves that have been lost in the pain. And we actually go through different journeys of re-embracing them and bringing them back into ourselves. And it's an extraordinary process, because you reconnect with energy and passion that you had like as a teenager. So those ideas that I had as an artist, I was able to start manifesting by painting because I wasn't scared anymore. I knew that nothing would hurt me the way I was afraid of in the past. Yeah. Boom.
We're going to take that as an underlining of the point being made at the time.
Yeah. So that was a big part, and my connection with nature. With what you were saying about women's sexual parts, by looking at nature, sexuality is everywhere. You know, my kids, when they were little, it was like, Mom, can't you just, paint a sunset? Do you have to paint naked bodies? And it was like, yeah, I do. I do need to paint naked bodies, because in that form, in those shapes, I found nature, and that was healing for me. And so I think that it's really important to commune with nature as part of your healing regimen.
And many of your paintings have the human body incorporated into the shapes and the flowers and the petal looks, the petal shapes
are there.
Yeah.
They're there. You can't miss them.
Yeah.
It just, in fact, one of the orchids, I really encourage people to look at orchids. They are the most sexual, juicy, colorful, amazing beings. And what really started my journey in this last decade, in my 50s, was to I found an orchid called the goddess. I call it the goddess orchid. It's the Disa uniforma, but you actually see a goddess in it. And also the vaginal opening. There's so much to see in it, and I just love her so much.
I love that. I'm actually a big orchid enthusiast. I love orchids.
Yeah. Have you seen the
Yes.
Disa uniforma?
I don't know that one. One of
I
my
will send you a picture of her.
I will check it out. Yeah, that'd be awesome. That'd be great. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful metaphors, and some amazing artwork, yours and the work of others too, that definitely has that kind of reference.
Well, and even the rose, the way the petals fold. And so a lot of times I call myself a multi-sensory artist, because what happens is when you go into a meditative state, when you're expressing yourself through art, and again, whatever the medium is, that when you're expressing yourself, you're actually communing with spirit. And so spirit starts sharing with you colors, ideas, words. I've written a lot of poetry. And so what happens with my art is that I try and incorporate as many senses as possible to engage the viewer. And so I'm actually communing with them as well. So I'll have the painting, I'll have poetry, and then I'll create an essential blend that ignites and opens the senses to receive the color, the power of color, and the imagery, and the words.
Love that. I love that multi experience, that we are whole beings and we're impacted by all of the elements of our senses. And so I haven't forgot about our panelist who asks a question, and I'm greatly appreciative of that. One of our attendees would love a little bit of a repeat on the CUNT acronym. If you can just repeat that again. Sure. Yeah.
And I've made an art piece with that as well. So commune, undulate. So communing is about coming into a place together.
Self-connection and other connection. Could it be both?
Doing it with yourself first.
Yes,
yes.
Sure.
And so sometimes we learn it the other way around, and we commune as women and join that bond, and that act of communing and resonating and realizing we're not alone, that creates a bond. So communing. Mm-hmm. And that's where our passion is. Spirit gave me, it's a very short prayer. It's our body is the temple, our breath is the prayer, our heart is the altar, and our passion is our power. And that's it. And that's what happens when you commune. So the next one is undulate. And that's getting into that river, that connection with the ocean, the wave that's within our beings. We're mainly liquid. So letting that movement happen, and especially around our pelvis. When you've had trauma, that part of us freezes in a lot of ways. So get those hips going and moving, and what better way to dance, you know? So that's undulate. And then and that's also a great way to experience orgasm. So, and then the next one is nourish. So by nourishing ourselves, we learn to better nourish others. And as women, we're always taught, put ourselves back. You're always in service. And so what's very powerful about stepping into crone is that you're reclaiming that now it's your time. You're no longer bleeding. And so your blood is yours. It's in you. And so that lets you change the game a little.
Oh my gosh, I hadn't thought of that aspect of the fact that we're retaining our blood and that life force and that energy to do all the things with.
Yeah. And so our blood is our life force. That's what makes us feel the passion, you know, and when you feel that fire in you, right? And then the last one is truth telling. And I think that it's very, very empowering for women to come together and feel safe enough to tell their story and to feel heard. There's something really, really empowering in that. So
I'm so with you.
Acronym.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. And there's so much in that I see passing through the circles of women in our midst. You know, I see so many of those pieces, and I really appreciate the delineation of that and really the specificity of all those components. They're so powerful when you can bring words to an idea and really make it clear.
Absolutely. And what's really fun is I have the banner up, and not everyone sees the word, you know, because it's broken into an acronym and words are under it. And so I get great delight. That's part of my Magdalene's mirth is when says, oh my God, that's cunt, you know. It's like, why, yes, it is. You know?
Now, I don't know if this is true for you, but as I myself go more into the world talking about my commitment to artful aging and to changing the story about how we see aging in our culture, changing the narrative, which is a commitment that I made last May, and I'm most of the way through my first year of really committing to doing work in that way, in that field, in that thinking. What I find is that I'm surprised that many of the people who respond the most viscerally and excitedly to my message are women in their 30s, which I've been really surprised by. Do you find that too as you go into the world, that people who are touched by you and inspired by you tend to be the younger women?
Nice. You know, I feel embraced, you know, that and that they get me. And I think I'm kind of symbolic that they can be radical as they get old. They're not, you know, like a fruit rotting on the vine, you know. That it can be a very vital and vibrant and passionate time in our lives, and that's separate than our sexuality. It's inclusive, but it's not exclusive to our sexuality, because some women are celibate, they're choosing it, or circumstantially they're celibate, and then some women are sexually active. So it doesn't matter. It's who you are, and owning that makes us sexual beings and passionate beings. So, and I think that conveys through who we are.
Yeah. And the other thing that comes up for me as you're talking, and I don't know if you've said this explicitly, but the feeling that I get from you as you're talking is this constantly reinvigorating, constantly learning, changing, growing, applying things to different areas. And I feel like that seems to be very much a part of your approach to living, and it seems like it's necessary. Maybe art is so symbolic and so important because in order to be an artist, you have to be present all the time to nature, to things unfolding, to creativity, to all of the unfolding that is our natural experience as, life filled vital beings.
Absolutely. And going back to the word commune again, it is a way to commune with the divine. Like I've had the experience where I've felt, especially through yoga, that you feel the presence of a higher force, a divine, the divinity within you. But in art, I actually felt like the divine needed my hand to express itself. And I had never experienced that before through anything else. So that was a very, very powerful experience for me. And I think that must happen with dancers and singers, that you feel that within you. So I believe that it's our feeling nature of God, or our feeling nature of good. When you look at the sound of God, it's, God, good, good, that it's all good, right?
Good. It's all good. Yeah. And being service to, the highest good for ourselves and for the world and for each other is a beautiful and creative practice. So
absolutely. And reclaiming our right to be ecstatic beings, that as women, I feel like we're wired for pleasure.
Ooh, can you say more about that? The reclaiming the ability and the knowingness of being ecstatic.
I think that the more you commune with yourself, the more you accept all of yourself as sacred, the more you start experiencing higher states of consciousness. So you could be communing in nature and feel an orgasm. That I think our minds have been taught that the only time we feel orgasm is through pleasuring our sexual organs or having sex with another person. But in reality, I think our whole being is sensual. And so when you incorporate more and more of your senses, I think that's what our sixth sense is that the embodiment of our sensuality. So you may feel a color, you may hear an emotion. You start it. I don't know how else to say it.
No, I love it. And, but before you even go on, I just want to say to our attendees, thank you so much for being here. We have so much wisdom and experience here in our guest, Joan Marie, and I'm wondering how this lands for you. Is there anything that we've talked about that's having to do with art or creativity or self-connection or being ecstatic or sensuality or sexuality or aging or anything that we've been talking about that that you have thoughts on, or that you want us to talk a little bit more about? Because we have a couple minutes left, and I will, if no one has anything that they want to share or that they want to throw out as a topic area, I guess what I would put to you, Joan, is what is there a particular line of thinking that you would actually share with your daughters, with your, I don't know if you have daughters, I mean metaphorical daughters, granddaughters, women who are coming up behind you, because that's one of the things I really believe is that ability to learn from each other in both directions, right? I want to learn from people older than myself, and I want to learn from people younger than myself.
Yeah.
I actually have more people in my life that are younger than me these days. So I think what I want to know is like what kind of directives you have to share with people in terms of how to approach life, how to approach self-understanding and connection.
Absolutely. I do want to ask the person that asked about the acronym of I want to make sure I answered them. So if they have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer that. But back to what you were saying, what I think if I had like a legacy phrase to is that challenge yourself to the end. That I want to be I want to be in a place of love for as long as I'm here. And that I always want to try and challenge myself. I want to put myself in situations where I may be the eldest person there, or I may be the youngest person there. And I always want to learn. I think that that's really important, to open yourself to new ideas. I think that's part of a compassionate life, is a willingness to be uncomfortable. And our discomfort can look a lot of different ways. It can be because of the unknown, or it can be challenging a belief system can make us feel really uncomfortable. So I think having a willingness to be uncomfortable. One of the things, I made a vow to myself. I think making vows to ourselves is a good thing. And holding ourselves accountable is that I made a promise to myself that I would never not go to something because I didn't have someone to go with me. So I've spent most of my adult life attending things that were really important to me. And I went by myself, and I learned to enjoy my own company, and I do. And you meet people that you may never meet if you were with another person. I've traveled by myself, and you have to be wise about that and not put yourself in harm's way. Be intelligent about how you do things, but doing that opens up new worlds and brings great joy. And I think that those are really important things to do in life. And also about our children and our children's children and ourselves, that one of the legacies of the Magdalene is no guilt, no shame. You clear that out of your body. You don't need to own it anymore. Make peace with it and live your life. It's your life.
Yeah, that's amazing. So first of all, I want to say thank you, for there was so much wisdom and brilliance in that, and encouragement and inspiration. And our attendee said yes, you did answer the question, and not only that, she also said that you're giving her so many ideas for how to embrace her 67-year-old life in ways that are powerful and appreciated. And she said this is wonderful. So thank you for that.
Yay.
Yeah.
I would love to share just a simple exercise that people could do. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. One thing though is, if people do explore words, to look at the definition and then go to the word origin. That's where you go into discovery.
Nice. Just
because
in terms of
time, decades will change words.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Just like the word crone. Crone now, if you look at it in the dictionary, will be very different. The word origin is crown, and it was for men and women. Right. So that's
I'm all about reclaiming the crown.
Yes. So a very simple thing that people can do is to place a hand on their heart, and placing the other hand, it doesn't matter if it's right or left, below their navel. And you go into a place of communion. You commune with yourself, and you fill the space between your hands with your breath, and you experience your breath as sacred. And a way you can go deeper with that, whenever I do that, I encourage people to do 3 to 5 breaths, slow and full and deep. Feel that in your body. If you are communing with yourself, you can go down further. Bring your hand a little further down. So I love that it's called the Mound of Venus. Like, how cool is that? Commune with Venus. What does Venus mean to you? And so bring your hand down further, and keep your one hand at your heart, and breathe through the space between your hands and commune.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. That was lovely. Even just the one breath I took was so nice.
It's beautiful.
I also want to share something. You mentioned that it's an opportunity when we're older to take on our own lives, and that sometimes how we think about our children can bring up maybe shame or regrets or things that we didn't do, because so much of motherhood in our culture has this surrounded in it, like not good enough, not contributing, not doing all the things, so much pressure. And I know that many women in my age group are either facing or starting to face empty nest, their children leaving, and that is its own living, what did you call divorce, like a living grief or living death.
Yes, yeah.
On some level, even though of course we're happy for our kids moving on. And
Yeah.
I found for myself this practice of every day lighting, it doesn't matter what it is. For me, I create a Palo Santo, and every day saying, I light this in remembrance of the fact that I rest in wholeness in my love for my children, and that I release and recognize that they're on their own journey and path, and that I'm here to support it, and that whenever they think of me, they know and feel my love for them and trust that they can come to me and I'll help them if possible. Something like, I say this every day because I'm in the explicit process right now of remembering that my children are not my children, they're,
They are, and I think that's the
I was
beauty.
quoting the prophet thing, but yeah.
But you had, earlier when we spoke, you had a beautiful phrase, and I can't remember the exact words, but it was something about embracing radical change. And I think that those steps with our children is embracing a radical change. You deepen, one of the most beautiful things is, in many ways, when your children are growing up, motherhood is a thankless job. It's hard, and sometimes we do great, sometimes we're terrible, and we can hold guilt and regret about that. What I found was developing and embracing a whole new relationship with your adult children and letting them embrace their own adulthood.
Yes, I think you just really clarified that part of that practice and part of the wisdom that comes from taking it on is being in that process of constantly evolving, that we're not stuck in one idea, that if we're in any kind of shame or regret, we're in the past, really. Whereas if we want to keep evolving our relationships with ourselves as mothers and with our children as they become adults, it means being in evolution, being in change.
Absolutely. And bearing witness. That's part of compassion. I really immersed myself in the compassion work because I find it so profound that the word compassion can be, one of the definitions is bearing witness, that accepting the fact we can't go and fix everybody. Okay, we're only accountable for ourselves. However, the power of bearing witness to another human being that may be suffering is so powerful for that person's empowerment. And I think as a parent, sometimes we want to continually offer advice, and it's a practice to wait to see if they ask us for our advice. And it's a beautiful thing when they do.
Yes, and that's exactly the practice that I do think it takes bearing witness to ourselves and conscious intention to do, because we have been, like I tell my kids sometimes, it's been like 18 years. I started out like, doing everything for you. So yes. I want to give you a chance and our attendees a chance to know a little bit more about how they can find you and the work that you're doing. So can you just share a teeny bit about where we'll also share links as we share this content, but maybe just can share a bit.
My website is compassioncentral.us, US. I chose that. We're on February 29th, we're doing a red tent in Carmichael, which is part of Sacramento. So if you're in that area, I'm on Facebook, Joan Marie, Magdalene's Mirth, enter the Orchid, Mirth To Earth, lots of different things. And my art, I have my office at Compassion Central is also my art gallery. It's where I do body work. I call it meditative massage, where I commune with the person that I'm working with, and it's a sacred space that I've created for people that want a different, deeper kind of body work.